Good morning or good noon, everyone. Welcome to the second Welcome to the second retreat for the Training and Career Development Core of CaTS, and we are focusing this retreat today on mentoring, and the mentoring pair, the mentee and the mentor, have been the subject of discussion since this morning, and we are privileged to have Christine Pfund here as our leader for the retreat, and I can tell you what a privilege it is for us to have the benefit of Dr. Pfund's presence, her experience, her wisdom, and her vision. Dr. Pfund is a molecular cell and molecular biologist from the University of Wisconsin, and after a research career in plant physiology, she has devoted the rest of her career to teaching and mentoring, focusing on the elements that are required to optimize the mentor-mentee relationship. She has led on a national level as well as within the University of Wisconsin, and her most recent achievement is garnering support from the National Institutes of Health to have a national effort in optimization of the mentoring experience. And she's one of the principal investigators of an award recently granted by the NIH to establish the National Research Mentoring Network. Dr. Pfund will direct the National Mentor Training Core, so that her sharing her experiences, her vision, and her wisdom with us today is indeed a privilege, and we are grateful that she found time in her schedule to come and work with us. The morning has been fantastic. I'm sure you will enjoy her presentation now, and we look forward to her workshop with the mentors following this plenary session. Dr. Pfund, the floor, the microphone, the audience is yours.
All right, so I have to get myself mic'd up because I got asked the dreaded question, can we videotape this? All right. Is that okay? All right, just a little nerve-wracking. Well, thanks so much, Roy, for the invitation to come and the slight arm twisting to get me here, but it didn't take much. I love New Orleans, and it was really a thrill to come back. So let me just start out by asking, how many of you had the thought, is she really going to talk for 90 minutes? I already got asked that once. So, no. I'll definitely pause for questions. We'll leave a lot of time for questions at the end. And so I'm not going to speak for 89.5 minutes straight and have one question at the end. So you can not be alarmed by that. So I'd like to use the time we have together to talk about a series of projects that I've had the privilege and honor to work on over the last 10 years that are focused on improving mentoring relationships across disciplines and across career stages. And this is the work that I have had the opportunity to collaborate with many different folks, many at Wisconsin, but around the country. I'll try to highlight some of them as I go, but I definitely want to say at the front end that I'm going to have the opportunity to share with you work from a lot of different people today and want to credit their contributions. So the first thing you'll probably notice is I have lots of affiliations and lots of logos up here. The two things I just want to note about that is I'm one of those folks that kind of are spread out all over the university, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I get to bridge lots of partnerships, but then everybody, you know, wants to make sure that I include their affiliation. So don't be scared by that. The other is that it's a decade worth of work that's been funded by so many entities, and so I absolutely want to acknowledge that. Am I changing slides right from the computer? Great, okay. So I wanted to just start off with a really generic definition of mentoring to get us all on the same page. Mentoring is a term that is just used generically. It has many different meanings, but really just at its core, it's really using one's own personal experience to guide another person through an experience that requires both personal and intellectual growth. And as all of you know, in the realm of scientific research, training, and career development, primary research mentors play a really critical role in this endeavor, and that's the relationship we've been focused on. There is certainly lots of interesting work being done and to do across many informal mentoring relationships, peer mentoring, career development mentoring, goes on. But the work I'm going to tell you about today is really focused on mentoring relationships in the realm of research between individual pairs. There's lots of mosaic mentoring, multiple mentoring, and that's something we're interested in, but not really the focus of what I'll talk about today. So the other thing is thinking about research mentors, and when we say that, what we mean. So obviously many of you are principal investigators, faculty who may serve as mentors for junior faculty, postdocs, and those folks in turn serve as mentors for grad students or med students, or the faculty are doing that directly. And then you have all of those folks having the opportunity to serve as mentors for undergraduates, depending on what kind of institution you're at. So we'll be talking about mentors and mentees today, but also appreciating that folks in that intermediate stage of their career are often functioning in both roles. And so they have both hats and are navigating both of those. So you can wear whatever hat you'd like today as we talk about the research we've been doing and the materials available to you. So the other thing I want to point out in terms of research mentoring is that a lot of times in research mentoring relationships, there's a very large focus on mastery of technical and disciplinary knowledge. That's really kind of the crux, training the next generation in your field. But then there's this entire domain of tacit skills needed to craft career, and those are really the how skills. And really, if you think about this in the broad sense, it's really career development. And really the way we're thinking about research mentoring now really is the combination of those. And I just want to credit my colleague who you'll hear about many times in this talk, Dr. Angela Byers-Winston at Madison, who's a clinical psychologist by training and works in the domain of social science, and she works on career development. And so we've really had a wonderful partnership at bringing together what happens in the science, technology, engineering, math, and medical disciplines with the social science of career development. So you're all here today, so presumably you believe mentoring matters, and it does matter. And I just want to point out a couple levels of how salient that is, both today in this room and also nationally. So first, I always like to credit the fact that I'm up here because of many people who served as mentors to me. And so I think anytime I'm talking about mentoring, I want to take a moment and thank those people that had the focus, took time, some of their focus on me and gave me their time and supported my career. So these are some of my key mentors. I won't name them all. Maybe you know some of them, maybe you don't. Obviously, mentoring matters here. You decided to focus on mentoring for the CaTS retreat. So it's obviously your focus on it means that it matters to this program, to this institution, and the partner institutions that are here. The literature also supports that mentorship matters. So strong mentorship's been linked to, excuse me, enhanced self-efficacy. I do have water, don't worry, I've got it right here. Self-efficacy, the desire to pursue PhD or MD, persistence in fields of science, technology, engineering, math, and biomedicine, productivity, career satisfaction. It's been, lots of work has been done on the role of mentorship in enhancing recruitment of underrepresented minorities, especially in the biomedical research pathway. So lots of work has been done on this. Now, interestingly and unfortunately, underrepresented minorities are less likely to be in effective mentoring relationships. So they often receive less mentorship than their non-minority peers. And minority investigators indicate inadequate mentoring poses obstacles to obtained funding. And this was highlighted perhaps most clearly in the Ginther report last year that presumably many of you know about, showing that scientists from racial minority groups are less likely than white applicants to receive research funding from NIH when all other things are kept constant. And one of the items cited for the reason for this is probably due to inadequate mentoring. And so there has been a huge national focus on mentoring over the last 5 years that were really highlighted in the last year when this report came out. So from a National Science Foundation perspective, the last few years we've seen them take on the requirement for postdoctoral mentoring plans to really have to concretely talk about how you're going to mentor postdocs. We've seen undergraduate research programs become undergraduate research and mentoring programs so that that piece isn't forgotten. From NIH, we've seen the Mentored K Awards, the CTSAs with a huge focus initially on mentoring, and I'll talk about some of the work we've been doing in that domain. You're now seeing a requirement for individual development plans, which we talked about this morning in one of the workshops, requiring all NIH-funded trainees to have and discuss individual development career plans with their mentors. And as Roy mentioned, the establishment of the National Research Mentoring Network, which I'll talk a little bit about at the close of my remarks today. So a couple of the key questions that I've had the opportunity with my colleagues to explore are, what are the critical elements in mentoring relationships that lead to positive outcomes? And when I mean positive outcomes, I mean productivity, persistent satisfaction. So we have lots of literature saying mentoring matters and affects these things, but we don't know what it is about those relationships that matters. Is it simply that you spent time together? Is it that you had good communication? Is it that somebody felt supported and that you cared about what they did? What is it about those relationships that matters? And are the critical elements for mentors from underrepresented groups at diverse institutions the same as for folks working at different types of institutions from non-minority groups or from different types of institutions and different disciplines? And lastly, the work that I've been working on for the last 10 years, but really has now come full circle to research it, is can mentors be taught to be more effective in addressing the critical elements in mentoring? And in the same way, can mentees be taught to be more proactive and effective in those relationships? So what I'd like to do today is talk to you a little bit about all three of these foci and some of the work we've been doing. It's just a snapshot of some of that work, and I'm happy to show you some of the resources that come from it that you can access after today, as well as direct you to bibliographies of our work as well as others that you can access, both for your own practice but also as you're grant writing and thinking about training programs that you may be involved in. So the first thing I wanted to talk about are critical elements of mentoring and what they are. So just take 10 seconds and think about, when you think about your most important mentoring relationships in your career, what mattered to you? I won't actually ask you to give an answer. Just think about it. What mattered to you the most? Giving an honest opinion, thanks. So there are probably many different answers in this room about what mattered the most. I tried to do the same exercise, and I put down a bunch of things that mattered, and different people played different roles for me in what mattered. So at some points in my career, their advocacy was really important. At other points, their role modeling was important. Sometimes it was just the funding that was really important. What was the most critical, though? And that changed over time. And so one of the things that we're really struggling with is to figure out what matters and at what stage and for whom. So the big picture that I want you to keep in mind today is when you think about the research mentoring relationship, What is it about that relationship that positively influences mentees' self-perceptions about what they're able to do and want to do? And how does that lead to positive STEM outcomes? And when I say STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, and medicine. And when I say positive outcomes, in the cases that we're looking at, is persisting in these fields, being productive in these fields because they want to be. So I want to first give you just a little bit of some of the theoretical lenses that we've been using that frame some of our work. And this is work I've been doing with my 3 colleagues at Wisconsin, Dr. Byers-Winston, Dr. Branshaw, and soon to be Dr. Leverett. And so we have really taken the theoretical framework of social cognitive career theory. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over this particular theoretical lens, but really at its base is when you have a learning experience, what is it about that experience that makes you believe that you can do something, which is self-efficacy, and that it's worth it, the outcome expectation? How do those things drive your interest in an area, your goals, and the actions you take, and eventually your persistence in that domain? And so we're really interested in when you intervene on the mentoring relationship, can you help mentees believe that they can do it? And can you help them believe that it's worth it? And will those have downstream effects of people staying in these fields and being productive in them? And so we have laid the mentoring research experience, which is the box with the dotted lines, onto the learning experience in this model that we're pursuing. So what is it about that experience? And in particular, we've been focusing initially on its influence on mentee self-efficacy belief. And so what I'll tell you is that we have done lots of research that I don't have time to talk to you at length about, but to tell you that what we've seen is that students, and in this case, this particular study was on undergraduate mentees, their perception of their mentors' effectiveness was positively associated with their evaluation of their own ability. So if they thought that their mentor was effective, they would more highly rate their own skills and knowledge, which would be what you'd expect about an increase in their own self-efficacy, their own belief in their ability to do it. And we were able to see that that was also associated with then their commitment to careers and moving on into graduate school or medical school. And when we looked at certain items on the surveys that we used for this type of research, things that were associated with self-efficacy were being able to say that their mentor showed interest in their research project, their mentor appreciated their contributions, and their mentor made them feel included. And so these are issues, as I talked to the guy, how skills, how are they making, how are you as mentors making your mentees feel included and that they belong and that they have identity in that experience? And I'm happy to share more about that afterwards. So where we've been going with our work now are really trying to hypothesize elements for effective mentoring relationships. And where I came into this work was really the work that I'd been doing on interventions to improve mentoring relationships. And so I mentioned before, a lot of work has been done on the roles mentors play in fostering the disciplinary skills of their mentees. And I'm not going to focus on that today. We've really focused on our interventions on the interpersonal skills that come to bear on mentoring relationships, and I'll talk about those interventions today. And then I'll talk towards the end a little bit about the new work we've been doing. We just had a R01 funded to really look at cultural awareness and cultural responsive mentoring and how that's playing out in mentoring relationships in these models as well. So back to our theoretical model. So just to give you a visual of this, really we're trying to intervene on the learning experience that we've considered to be the mentored research experience. And when we intervene there, what do we see as the downstream effects on mentee self-efficacy, mentee outcome expectations, their productivity, their commitment to certain career paths, and their persistence in them? That's a very long-term study. And so I won't have all the answers, and we have been working across different career stages. So we work with undergraduate mentees and their mentors. We work with junior faculty mentees and their mentors. So I'll try to be very clear about what career stage and what discipline I'm talking about. We obviously hope that all that we find translates across career stage and across discipline, but we know that there's going to be lots of specifics and variables that change across those groups. So when I talk first about the intervention work that we've been doing for the last decade, I have to give credit to one of my dearest mentors, Jo Handelsman, who's now at the White House. This was her idea 12 years ago, was we should train mentors to be more effective research mentors. And all the work I'm going to talk about from there stemmed from really a page in her HHMI professorship proposal about 13 years ago. And that was when I first started working with her on this work, so I just want to make sure I credit her. So about 11 years ago, we developed and published a training curriculum called Entering Mentoring. This is basically a process-based curriculum done in small groups that addresses these topics in mentoring, which were thought to be effective in the relationship. Let me say effective. Would influence the relationship. This comes from organizational change literature, the business literature, and from experience. And none of them should surprise you. So effective communication, expectations, assessing understanding, addressing diversity, discussing ethics, fostering independence. What is your mentoring philosophy? So what we did is we developed a process-based curriculum using case studies and group problem solving. It's aimed at awareness raising. And it really is a forum for small groups to really grapple with challenges in mentoring, these core themes or competencies, and use the collective experience of mentors in a group. And then we've spent the last 5 years linking to resources that have been developed to improve mentoring for folks engaged in this type of training. In 2006, we published the results of self-reported changes in behavior from mentors who were working with undergraduates. And this is showing a comparison of mentors working with undergrads across one summer. The light blue are mentors working with undergrads that did not partake in 8 hours of mentor training. And the dark blue lines are the mentors who did engage in 8 hours of training while they were working with undergraduate researchers. And so we were able to show that the curriculum seemed to be having a report, at least on self-reported behaviors of mentors engaged in certain research mentoring activities. Now, one, I always say, like discussing mentee expectations is on here, discussing mentoring with colleagues, even orienting them to the building. Because there were things in the curriculum that were, what do you do in the first hour when you meet your mentee the first time? And so things like that were even subtle, tiny changes, but were significant. Since that time, we had an NSF grant. We adapted the curriculum for the mentors of undergraduates and the mentors of graduate students across 9 subdisciplines. So we have curricula now for physics and field biology and chemistry and psychology and astronomy and astrophysics, because astronomy didn't want just astronomy, they also wanted astrophysics. And we've partnered with disciplinary societies. They're all freely available. I'll show you that later. But there was I think it was really interesting because although the core principles and competencies that we've been promoting for effective mentoring are really consistent across disciplines, this became an issue. People wanted their own curriculum. They wanted their own case studies with their own language. Sometimes it was a matter of just changing an example to make it feel that it belonged to the astronomers. But it was impactful because the implementation went way up when people believed that the curriculum was for them. So those are, we've been doing some work with those. This is just one group. This is self-reported skill gains in faculty mentors working with grad students and postdocs after a mentor training workshop. This was a 6-hour workshop. Again, self-report, but just showing some immediate self-reported gains across the competencies. About 4 years ago, our clinical and translational research grant proposal was being written. And I won't share the whole story, but mentor training got written into it. And when University of Wisconsin-Madison was awarded the grant, a very funny thing happened because someone came to my door and said, "You're supposed to adapt mentor training for clinical and translational research mentors. It's in our grant." I said, "Wow, well, surprise, surprise." But it turned out to be an enormously fortuitous opportunity because we were able then to start to work with the development team to adapt the approach for the mentors of postdocs and junior faculty in clinical translational research. And the really great thing about this is because we were then linked to NIH funding, we were able to do a randomized controlled trial, which I'll talk to you about. This is the team at Wisconsin that has been working on this at our Institute for Clinical and Translational Research. We've had many national partners, too many to mention here, but I definitely wanted to call out the folks at Wisconsin who have led this effort. So this adaptation of our intervention is 4 2-hour sessions across all of these topics, many of which I showed you previously. An addition of promoting professional development was added to this particular version. What we did is we adapted the mentoring curriculum and adapted it for use of clinical and translational research mentors. We trained facilitators at 16 sites across the country, including Puerto Rico. And then we evaluated the effectiveness via randomized controlled trial. I forgot about the timeline. I just want to point out, and this is of no credit to me, this is the amazing research team. This entire thing was done in 19 months because that was the amount of time we had for the supplement, and they were phenomenal. When you see the scope of this, I take no credit. They did all the work. So we recruited 283 mentor-mentee pairs across the 16 sites. The researchers interviewed all 566 folks. The mentors were then allocated into a control group. They were randomized by site or the training group. The mentor training was implemented at those 16 sites. There were 6 to 14 mentors in small group at each site. Then those folks took surveys. I'll show you some of that data. And then every mentor and mentee was followed up with a follow-up interview using a mentoring competency assessment I'll tell you about. We had a 98% retention rate of participants. These are the 16 sites. I don't expect you to read them all, but they were fairly spread out across the country. We're missing a bit on the mountainous region there in the west, but that and the south. Yeah, look at you. No folks down there. That's all right. There's still opportunities. I know everyone always looks for themselves. They're like, how did we not get involved? So what I'll tell you, actually, this is an important point. None of these sites received money. They all implemented this on their own CTSA budgets, including the baseline interviews, which is pretty amazing. So here's the study population of the mentors. I'm showing you this for 2 purposes. One is to show you the match of the control and the intervention group. Also to show you the career stage. We were mostly working with full and associate professors. We had a slightly higher percentage of males. This is their demographic data. And so I'll just tell you that the most common mentor in the trial was a 50-year-old white male with 15 years of mentoring experience. So these are not newbies. These are folks that have been mentoring a long time. These are the mentees, slightly higher percent of females in the mentee population. Here's the demographics. Most of them, so the most typical profile was a 36-year-old white female who's an assistant professor. They had to be doing at least 50% time clinical research, clinical and translational research. So let me show you a little bit first some of the data from the mentors who went through the training, just reporting on their experience. I want to show you just something about the effectiveness of the sessions and their self-reported skill gains. So I'll tell you that 88% of them said that 8 hours of training was worth their time. I will tell you that people said there's no way you will get experienced mentors to spend 8 hours of their time and think that it's useful. Now you can argue with me that after they did it, they're not going to admit that it wasn't worth their time, but we were happy to see a high percent saying that it was worth their time and that they would recommend it to a colleague. This is their self-reported skill gains across the 6 competencies before and after the intervention. And so I want to share with you the highlights from the interview study, which was really the primary outcome of the study from the interviews. So the interview protocol was very long. It has lots of other elements, but I'm just going to talk to you today about the mentoring competency assessment. This was a 26-item metric that was developed for the purposes of this study. It was validated and published. It has items across all 6 competencies. Interviewees were asked to rate themselves both quantitatively and then discuss it qualitatively in the interview. So there were example questions like, working with my mentee to set clear expectations of the mentoring relationship. And they were asked in a true pre-sense, just the single, not before and after, and then afterward they were asked, where were you before and where are you now? So that's a retrospective measure as well. So what I'll show you are true pre-post data as well as retrospective pre-post data. So let me show you this first. So this is the primary outcome, which was published several months ago in Academic Medicine. And what I can tell you is that the intervention group on the 26-item composite shows a significant change in their self-reported effectiveness compared to the control group, both at the true pre-post measure and the retrospective measure. And what's interesting about the retrospective measure is that trained mentors drop their pre-scores. And this is often seen when you have interventions that are aimed at awareness raising, where people begin to realize they don't know as much as they thought they did. So the other thing that I'll tell you is that there were lots of subscores that are really interesting. Communication, expectations, and professional development had the largest subscore changes. And what we really also wanted to know, even though it was a secondary outcome, was were the mentees, could they tell if their mentor had gone through training, even though they had been blinded to whether or not their mentor went through training? And what we were able to show is that MCA composite scores were significantly higher for mentees with mentors in the intervention group in the retrospective measure. And so this is really interesting because they had, and we asked them, do you think your mentor is in the control group or the intervention group? And let me tell you, they get it wrong all the time. So they really were blinded and they really didn't have any idea, and yet they rated those mentors more effective. We also wanted to see if mentors who went through the training actually implemented any changes in their behavior. So they were asked if they had implemented any changes in their mentoring across the length of the study. And those qualitative answers were coded as no change, I'm aware that I want to do something, I intend to do something, or I actually did something. What I'm going to show you is just the data from people had to give a specific example of actually changing something. So you couldn't just say, yeah, mentoring compacts are good. You had to say, I am now implementing a compact with my mentees. And that's the only way you could get in the behavioral change group for an implemented change. So what we showed was 87% of those in the intervention group reported at least one specific concrete change in their practice, compared to 42% of the control group. Now you may say, why would the control group change? Well, it turns out the interview itself is a pretty interesting intervention, which isn't surprising because people who reflect on mentoring tend to say, ooh, now that you asked me that, maybe I should do that. And so that was actually very interesting. Now we can get into discussions about, do you actually need training or can we just do the interviews? But that's a whole nother discussion.
Is that reported by the mentor or the mentee?
That is reported by the mentor. The mentee data is still being analyzed, and whether it aligns, yeah. So I always get to this part in the talk and I say, there are so many proposals to write with this data set. Anybody who wants to collaborate, come talk to me, because we don't even have enough time or people to analyze the amount of data. It's such a massive data set, and there's so many interesting things in there. So actually what we are actually analyzing right now are simply the responses from mentors and mentees that are focused on if they did anything intentional and concrete to better address diversity in the relationship. So that's where we're working right now. So we were able to then get more NIH funding to create a couple more adaptations of this intervention, one for biomedical research mentors of graduate students, one for those mentors of researchers in community engaged research, and the last one for those in clinical and behavioral research, all of which are available. And in full circle, we have come back with everything we've learned over the last 10 years from all of these reiterations and testing, and we have created a second edition of the original Entering Mentoring curriculum, which should be out in 2 weeks. So that's a lot of materials, and so one of the things is that we wanted to pull all of these materials, curricula, proof of concept, references into one website. And so this website, sorry, the mouse is very touchy. I'm going to get there. I practiced. I can do it. Okay. I want to show you this website primarily because I wanted to make sure that you knew about what was available to you. And the things that you may want to use on this website vary probably in where you're coming from. So things on this website, there is a whole series of resources for mentors and mentees. And for folks who were in the workshop this morning, I mentioned that I would show this. So this resource site is divided by stages of the mentoring relationship. So from selection to alignment, and alignment is really when you're starting to align expectations and getting going and cultivating the relationship, so in kind of that intermediate time all the way to closure. There are resources for mentees and mentors. These include everything from example individual development plans. So if those of you are those on your radar now, there's lots of different examples here from across the country. How to build a mentoring team, how to interview for potential mentors and mentees, even questions about taking a self-survey on, are you ready to take on another mentee? Can you handle it? Is it a responsible decision? There are mentoring compacts and lots of examples from across the country, different types, different career stage. There are lots of tools on effective communication, and there are lots of tools on closing out the relationship and transitioning to the next career stage. So those are all freely available, and if they're of use to you. There are also, there's an entire bibliography. It is massive. I won't pull it up. For those of you who are thinking about wanting to dive more into this, but also if you're writing proposals, hopefully this will ease your stress in terms of pulling together relevant resources for making cases about approaches to mentoring, effective mentoring, and all of that type of work. It also includes all of the curricula choices that I just showed you. I'm going to just show you this page. They are all available by request or by PDF download. The clinical and translational research curriculum has actually been published in softcover as well for those who want that instead of their own PDF. So there's lots of ways that you can access the curriculum. The other thing that's in process, you can access it here. I'm not going to try it because the mouse is so sensitive and I'll make people seasick. There is a build your own curriculum option, so that if you want to take pieces from different curricula and say wrap it up into a 1-hour workshop, and you want something on expectations and another thing on understanding. So you can basically build your own, and some of that's still under construction, but all of these resources are available. Again, might be useful to you as a trainer, might be useful to you as somebody training undergrads, grad students, postdocs, also might be useful to you as you think about proposals and training grant programs. The last thing I want to show you is that all of the things that I'll be talking about, I'm going to click here. So in terms of thinking about mentor training, and if that's something that you think about implementing, this page has lots of information on how to implement training at your own institution, as well as links to Train the Trainer workshops. So we have been hosting these across the country for folks that really want to do this but don't just quite feel ready to implement 8 hours of training. And so those are also available. And there actually is one coming up in February. If you are interested, you can talk to me afterward. So I'm going to pause there before I move on to just talk about a little bit of our recent work on cultural responsive mentoring and see if there's any questions, because that's a long time to talk without asking for questions. Yeah?
What about persistence of these effects?
I know, right? So anybody want to write that R01? So the data set, doing the follow-up with even a subset, so there's the bibliometrics you could do simply on the entire population from the study. There's follow-up interviews with the subset, persistence of the effect, and we want to do all of that, and we just haven't done it yet. The timeline is perfect because we're just about far enough out that we should see some stage transitions. So yeah, honestly, it's on my to-do list. We just haven't written the proposal yet. I'm not kidding if anyone wants to collaborate. There's so much to do. Yeah.
I mean, along those lines, have you thought about outcomes, sort of concrete benchmarks you could use to see if this translates into some productivity, jobs,
right,
wealth, happiness?
Wealth, happiness, yes. Yeah, so, there's the easiest bite, and this is actually a bigger question, too, of, what is success. So we can take things that, NIH, of course, wants to count. Like, okay, do we see a higher publication rate in people who work with trained mentors over a certain span of time? Okay. But there's a whole other thing here, because effective mentoring also, we believe, and we've seen it anecdotally, and you probably wouldn't, I would say agree, helps people make better decisions about their career. Well, that can also include different career path, which is another whole part of NIH's, if you know about the BEST grants. And so tracking career decision making may be an enormously useful part of this as well, but that's not going to get capped. Those are going to be weighed differently in terms of success and failure, but depend who's measuring. So there's a lot we can do quantitatively that I think are things that we just have to know. But I think there's a lot we're going to have to do qualitatively because it's more complicated. And the long-term effects may come out quantitatively, I hope, because that'll be easier to do. But I think a lot of them are going to come out qualitatively. Does that answer your question? It's not very satisfying. We have some predictions, and I'll spend a little bit of time on that in a minute, of what we think. So here's the big thing. We would like to promote standards of effective mentoring that have evidence to suggest that those standards lead to persistence and productivity, leave out the gray part of what those measures are. We're moving that way. To do that work takes an enormous N. But that's really, as we mentioned, the National Research Mentoring Network, which I'll tell you about in a couple minutes, allows us at least the possibility of a big enough N and enough variation to start to answer those questions. But it's going to be a while. Yeah.
What are the most common behavior changes?
Yeah. So the question is, what's the most common reported behavioral changes? The largest one, so I'll give you a couple examples on it. The biggest one is the use of written documents about expectations. So getting things down in writing, having those conversations with trainees, not letting expectations be a black box, revisiting them and aligning them. So that, number one, you see the biggest change there. But you also see a lot of interesting small changes in communication. So one we see come up often, and we know it's prompted by one of the case studies that's used in the training, is people start to talk about meeting with their mentees in a different place in their office. So there's a lot of discussion because of one of the cases where someone's distracted by their computer and their phone during a feedback conversation. So you get a lot of mentors saying, I move my chair out in front of my desk when I meet with my mentee now. I ask my mentee to prep for the meeting this way so that I'm better on it. I ask them to follow up with feedback on the meeting after we meet. So you see a lot of those communication, which are just good communication tactics, but you see a lot of mentors mentioning specific changes in that arena as well. And then they go down. Then they're more variable, but those are the two biggies. Yeah.
In the randomized trial you described, it wasn't clear if you were randomizing by individual, I assume it's the mentor-mentee pair, or by institution.
It was, so the randomization occurred at the institute site level, so at the site level, and it was by the mentor. So the mentee went with the mentor. The mentor was randomized into training.
A given site would have...
They'd have, 10 and...
Randomized both ways, okay.
Correct, you got it, yep. Yep.
You see mentor training being required at some point in the future.
So, yeah, so you might... There's required and there's strongly recommended. I see mentor training being strongly recommended, and it's already happening, because what you're seeing is the pressure from, which is great for this type of work, but is the pressure of people incorporating some approach to preparation for effective mentoring relationships in training grants, and so it's being driven by the grant proposals themselves. And you're seeing it at NSF, NIH, HHMI. Mandatory is interesting. We have a couple training programs that have required it at Madison, but now and they basically had to take 4 hours of training sometime in their 3-year window before they got renewed as a trainer. We just came up on 3 years, and I said to the PI, what are you going to do with your 15 trainers that didn't take it? Now, it's pretty good because they have 100 trainers. I don't know the answer yet. I think it's really hard to enforce. But one of the things I like to say, and it might seem like a a cop-out of an answer, but I really do believe it. This type of intervention is really about making well-intentioned good mentors better. This is not an intervention to make mentors who don't want to mentor and are bad mentors good. That's a different place. That's a different approach. And I think if you're going to argue that in any, let's say, a training grant program like the one I'm talking about has 100 mentors and 85 have gone through training, I'd take that as a huge success. The 15 that haven't, well, you're going to have to make a hard decision as the PI of that training grant if you're going to place students with them. But requiring is tough because when you start to require, you start to get into the checklist mentality. And this intervention may have a very different feel if it's felt as being remedial and required. You have people this is process-based, and so you need people to want to commit to it for it to work. That doesn't mean that there could be a different type of intervention, but I think for this type of intervention, you need people who have to want to be there. So that's my answer. So I would like it to be very, very strongly encouraged. The other thing I want to say is this isn't the only mentor training game in town. There are people across the country doing really great work. There's some people at Pitt, at UCSF, Minnesota, who are doing phenomenal work in this arena. We've had the privilege and opportunity of the resources to do it on a national scale, which has given it a lot of visibility. But certainly even on our website, we point to all of those other resources. So if you are thinking of incorporating this training, if this doesn't feel right, doesn't fit your needs, certainly look to the other folks that are doing good work in this area as well. All right, so the other thing I just want to mention is that we're not just working on the mentor side of the relationship. We're doing a lot of work on mentee preparation. We did just a short workshop this morning for the CaTS scholars, but this also is building off of work that we started with undergraduates. And so I just mentioned this curriculum, which is entering research, and it's really for helping undergraduate researchers be proactive in their relationship all the way from finding a mentor to basically working all the way up to presenting with that mentor. And we've adapted much of this material, although it's not published yet, for graduate student mentees, for postdoctoral mentees. We have yet to work on the junior faculty mentees. Obviously, the needs change for the mentees as they become more independent and move across their career, but I just didn't want to just leave off that side of the relationship. I'm not going to talk about that work today or the evaluation and research we're doing there, but I did want to let you know that those materials and that research is being done. So I want to just spend maybe 5 minutes telling you about some exciting work that we're launching in cultural awareness within mentoring relationships, and then I just want to spend about 5 minutes telling you about the National Research Mentoring Network so that you know about it. And it's particularly relevant to this group because it's linked to a very large grant that Xavier just got, which you may or may not be aware of. So again, this is the team that's working on this. And so when we think about mentoring, as I said, we're focused on the bidirectional relationship, of course acknowledging that there are many complex multi-mentor relationships as well. And these relationships, as I hope I've mentioned, have impact trainees' academic career pursuits, and they're really critically shaped by the mentor as well as the mentee. But the thing that we don't often talk about is they happen in a cultural context. And it's not something that's really a lot is paid attention to, but it's very important. And when I say cultural context, I mean cultural in the broadest sense. There's a disciplinary culture, there's an academic culture, and then there's culture across all lines of demographics and identity formation. So we're really interested in exploring how mentors and mentees in science conceptualize and understand demographic cultural diversity and its relevance in the relationship. And the reason we got really interested in this, besides the fact that we just thought it was important, was we started asking mentors and mentees what the salience of cultural factors in the mentoring relationship were to them. And so we did some qualitative interviews a couple of years ago about the role of gender and race ethnicity with mentors and mentees, and these were undergraduate mentees and grad student, postdoc, and faculty mentors that had worked together for at least a summer. And what I want to show you is that when we did a rough quantitation of whether or not gender played a role in the relationship, race ethnicity played a role, and whether they should intentionally draw on diversity in their research group, we got fairly aligned answers. But what was really interesting to us is when we asked them should you address diversity directly in the mentoring relationship? About half the mentors said you should, but 87% of the mentees said you should. And this gave us an interesting window of what mentees wanted to discuss at a higher rate than what mentors thought should be discussed. Now, what should be discussed becomes a whole interesting line of question. But at least there was this interesting window of difference. And we really then decided to pursue this at length and have gotten recent funding from NIH to do that. Yes?
Was the diversity equivalent in both the mentor and mentee group?
Fairly. This was a very preliminary study. We did our best. It's not perfect. So what we have found from those interviews is that mentors and mentees refer more frequently to the salience of gender than to race ethnicity. You might just say that's easier to talk about. But certainly, when given the option to default there, that's where they went. And some mentors believe that being explicit about it makes them vulnerable to being perceived as prejudice, and it becomes a huge block in the discussion. More mentees than mentors agreed cultural diversity mattered in the relationship, and really the dominant ideology among the mentor interviews was that science is color and culture blind, and thus there's a low consciousness of how cultural matters play out. But the problem is that ignoring cultural diversity in mentoring can lead to miscommunication, privilege dominant cultural norms, mismatched expectations, value orientations differing, conflicting working style. So regardless of whether it's being discussed, it's playing out. And it's something that we really haven't tackled in terms of mentoring relationships. And so I used this quote. This is one of the quotes from the randomized controlled trial, actually, that's we really were highlighting initially as kind of a change in the way people were talking about their thoughts about culture and difference. And in this case, it's just difference. So this one of the trained mentors said, I think one of the most important parts of the training was just hearing what other mentors would say to some of the cases and how they would handle things. And I think I'm so used to doing things my way because that's how my mentor did it with me and that's how I do it with my mentees. But I think it gave me more strategies to deal with difficult mentees. We'll come back to that. I usually only take a specific type of mentee in my lab, ones that are like me and ones that will succeed. It made me think maybe I could take on a more difficult mentee and change the way I mentor with them to make them successful. I use this quote for two reasons. One is because when we first read it, we were like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. People are really thinking about who they could work with. But then there was something about the difficult that really didn't set well. Like, well, what does that mean they're a difficult mentee? Are they really difficult or are they just different? And what do you mean only a specific type of mentee that would likely succeed? And what I think this highlights is that our initial awareness raising may have done some interesting awareness raising, but it also realized that we were only scratching the surface of having to really start to go where this type of awareness raising might set someone up. Because if you get to this place, you can become aware and paralyzed. Because now what is this mentor supposed to do? Are they supposed to examine what they think is success? Are they supposed to reevaluate how to have conversations about difference and how that plays out? And that is really, I think, where we are. Is I think that we have seen some really interesting results with the intervention, but we've only scratched the surface and we want to go much deeper here. And really, skills to become culturally responsive mentors, and where we're starting to go, can start to move mentors who are in this really wonderful awareness-raising place to a place of really intentional and sensitive action. And so Dr. Angela Byers-Winston is currently writing and will submit soon a concept paper on culturally responsive mentoring that's really built on the cultural responsive pedagogy from the educational literature. Really, mentors acknowledging their cultural identity worldviews, affirming their trainees' cultural heritage and diversity, awareness and skills in interactions, mentoring, communication, in culturally responsive, competent ways. And so we have actually pilot tested a short-term 2-hour intervention that really gets at defining culture, cultural competence, multicultural aspects, the culture of science, exploring cultural identities, what it's like to be, in this case, different than the majority in a research group, in a research department. We do case studies on cultural competence and how to address them. We talk about why color blindness isn't an effective strategy. We talk about what it means in practice to be a culturally competent or culturally responsive mentor. We're still building what that is, figuring out what's effective, but this is a first start. And so development of this type of intervention, more qualitative data analysis about it, what it means, how it plays out, looking at the impact of this short and long term is really where we're going for the next 3 to 4 years. And so I will say that we have some, just in the beta testing, some really nice participant quotes about mentors going through this, being more self-aware about their commonalities and cultural competence, helping them be more comfortable talking about issues that are sometimes uncomfortable to talk about, and new cultural issues that they should be aware of when thinking about mentoring relationships. So I'm going to stop there. So that's kind of just beginning work, but certainly if this is a realm that you are interested in or have experience in, whether positive or negative, would love to hear your thoughts on that. And then I just wanted to spend a couple, did you have a question?
Well, the Robert Johnson Foundation has been doing mentoring for minorities, and I'm one of those people. But there are very significant, important issues about persistence and what success is in academia. Because the money, granting, the funding, the relative lack of bridge funding, especially for culturally slightly different, sometimes not acknowledged values, really makes it so that you have to make very difficult decisions when you're trying to balance life. And I think we need to, while we're doing this mentoring, teaching, really be very upfront about balancing life so that you don't burn out, so that you can remain persistent and really build the scientific mind while you prepare to re-enter with a vengeance once your values are back. Because I'm in that journey right now. I am a recipient of a MERS, I'm a recipient of a K, I did Robert Wood Johnson, and I'm excited about doing something, as a result of Katrina and very intense learning and understanding the biological principles of that. But it really requires persistence and patience and understanding what it is that you want as a human being. And I'm sorry to say that in my, now full-on, associate professor now, just a few months ago, thank you. It's just really, you have to be determined and know what you need to do. And we need to have effective mentoring that way. And even though a lot of people don't want to do basic research, and I might be doing translational research or population research, to have the opportunities and the training and the mentoring at different institutions. I actually think going to different institutions and working with LSU specifically, I see some of my colleagues up there, and really going at it is most important when you're talking about persistence, but that you must never, whether based on gender or your cultural values and your ethnicity, understand what's important to you, because that is extremely damaging. And when we're doing this, we need to be very upfront about that.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that, and I think one of the, in doing this work, and again, it's at the very beginning, and I'm glad you brought up the Robert Johnson Foundation. So we're actually working with some of the folks, had been doing that, well, because they've been thinking about it for a long time, as well as others.
And they're very successful, and we talk about this, and I am part of the diversity in Hispanics. Most people don't even know I'm Puerto Rican, but I say it all the time. It's just, I've had some very deep conversations, about diversity, but the truth of the matter is we are, diverse. But we have to understand our values and where do we fit in academia, and how do we really keep a persistent and understanding that this is valuable to me as a person, yet there are other things. How do I manage that? And that mentoring is lacking at this moment.
And I think, and I'll talk a little bit about the National Research Mentoring Network, because I think at its core that's the premise, is that if it's truly going to diversify the biomedical workforce, then it has to deal with the fact that it is not always that the culture of science and research can be integrated with the identity of diverse groups. And you have to find a way to bring those together if you truly want diverse folks to persist. Because if it continues to be at odds, then at some point along the way, when it gets hard, that at odds battle will take you out. And so I think but that is difficult work, important work, but I think if we don't talk about that, we just go, we'll be better communicators, which is important, but there's a much more important and a deeper issue that's also very important, which is that there's a cultural element to that has to be recognized.
And I'm glad that you were talking to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, because it takes a lot of courage to say these things, and if I don't do it here in my own institution, then I'm really a little critical. But that some of us have been there, some of us have done that, some of us have been mentored, funded, and then you break that no funding. Then you have to make a gigantic decision, and you're good enough to be in academia. But now that I realize, oh my goodness, I can do population health. I'm doing, I want to work with a PhD so that we can understand the effects of all these things. I'm interested, that need to be studied because no one else will, and I want to. And I think we need to have a support network for those people. And I haven't been there. I feel like, my goodness, I had a lot of support, but it really took difficult decision making. It wasn't easy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to that quote that you put up about the mentor only taking specific types of students.
How did you react?
Dealing with difficult students. Maybe in my very simplistic view of what an effective mentor is, I kind of feel like you need to acknowledge that every person is different and individual, and you need to sort of tailor a mentoring plan that is specific to this individual as compared to this one and this one. I'm just wondering if you can kind of speak on if you have any data that supports that, or if you're, I guess, doing research to follow that up.
Yeah, so I think, you raise, if I'm hearing you right, really, the tension between wanting there to be core common elements, competencies to effective mentoring relationships that transcend differences. But then knowing that how those get implemented have to be, every relationship's idiosyncratic. They have to vary. And that is the tension between, that truly, if you believe truly effective mentors can live in that tension. Like, I need to have effective communication. Here's what's in my toolbox, but actually I have this approach works here and this one works here. But from a research perspective, that makes it extraordinarily difficult. So, because you have so many variations, right? So I don't have a great answer for you. We have really, and it may be because my training is in basic science, that we tried to go for the common factors first because it was the easiest to try to get some momentum, some leverage, some good evaluation, some basic research. I think now that there's more interest, more funding, a larger platform, a larger landscape for this type of work, we can start to think about those studies. I don't pretend to be an expert in designing those. I work with great people who have a great design, and in terms of that. But I don't think we have an answer, and I don't think we've even started to go down that path because it's so complex. But we're going to have to, because you can't just distill it down to common factors as clean, as nice as I'd like to show you the data from doing that.
My background is actually in clinical medicine, and I think that quote really brings forth the idea of unrecognized prejudices, unrecognized biases. If we're seeing unrecognized biases at the level of the mentors, how can we believe that we're not passing those unrecognized biases down to the level of the mentees?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think coming back to your point, and I'll just answer that, and then I'll just tell you about the network and end. One of the places we really want to go in our scale development and in our analysis is where we really think we're going to find some really interesting results is measuring the alignment across certain scales of the players in the relationship. Because it may not matter how much of a gain you get in a certain competency for the mentor and in the mentee. What might matter is that you're aligned in where you are. That turns out methodologically to be very, very complicated and difficult, but we've got to figure out a way to go there, and we're looking to different fields because I think that's where we're going to have the sensitivity and the real ability to measure across individual partnerships between mentor and mentee. So we're working with folks to try to design things like that, but you know, this is, and especially where my training is, and I keep saying, well, let's do X, and they go, yeah, that's nice, you can't do that methodologically. That actually won't tell you anything. So if we can get to method that will address that, I think we'll be in good shape. We're looking now at like a lot of the scales and approaches that have been used like in counseling between client and counselor, because a lot of those types of work has been there. There's actually some really interesting work too in actors and directors, and that is, so there's really, you know, when you're having those interesting relationships and looking across alignment. So the last thing I want to tell you about is the National Research Mentoring Network, which Roy mentioned. This is actually only the second time that I've had a chance to share it because it just got funded in September. It's been a very long road. If you don't know, so the NIH has just recently funded a very large program out of the Office of Workforce and Diversity that has 10 build institutions. These are building, oh, I'm going to get it wrong, infrastructure for leadership and diversity, something like that. Did I do it right? I did it right. I think I did it right. I have it on a slide. I should just not cheat. There you go. Building infrastructure, learning to diversity. Xavier has one of these, if you don't know. There are only 10. They have big networks. They are large, large grants. And their goal is to diversify the biomedical workforce across the entire pipeline. So I mention it to you because Xavier is partnering with lots of campuses across this area and will have lots of visibility in this arena. There are 10 build institutions and partnerships. There's one network, National Research Mentoring Network, which we fondly refer to as Norman. And folks at dinner last night heard me say, my husband keeps saying, I'm really tired of this new guy Norman, because he's taking up all my time. But basically the opportunity is this. The lack of adequate mentoring is a problem for trainees at all career stages, and we have to do better. And this provides an opportunity and resources to do something big and different to address this problem. And so our transformative goals are to create opportunities for mentees across career stages to find competent mentors and engage in productive supportive relationships, to provide effective professional development for mentees across the career continuum, and to directly address the benefits and challenges of diversity, inclusivity, and culture within mentoring relationships. We are supposed to serve the builds and the nation on a small budget. But we are excited, and it's the first time we've had this kind of national opportunity. So we're not deterred by the money. We're going to go big and go for lots of partnerships. So our activities are going to build establishing robust partnerships for mentors and mentees. We're going to have a massive online recruiting for mentors and mentees. We hope people still have mentoring relationships locally and when they go to other institutions. But if any of you are familiar with MentorNet, there will be a NormanNet that will be for the biomedical workforce. We're going to be collaborating with the build institutions as well as many other minority serving institutions. That doesn't exclude non-minority institutions, but there will be a definite focus there. We're going to be providing mentoring, networking, professional development across all career stages, mentor and mentee training opportunities in person, synchronously online, asynchronously, the entire gamut, and we're going to be working with a National Data Collection Center out of UCLA. So this is hard to read. It's a massive network of many different organizations. We have something like 74 professional and disciplinary societies. Many of the programs have been working nationally on diversity initiatives. Any type of the P60s, the P20s, the minority serving institutions, lots of Research One partners. It's an absolute massive enterprise. These were the Vanguard proposal partners. This doesn't mean we're not open to other partners. There was just such a big competition across groups going in for this, so people partnered up. These are the folks that were committed across the country to us from the get-go, and now that, that we've had the fortunate to be awarded, we're certainly recruiting more partners. The infrastructure, not surprisingly, will be regionally hubbed just for efficiency. This is just the Midwest hub with some of our committed partners, and there'll be lots of activities at each of these hubs. The hub, even though it has an individual institution, the activities can actually move around the hub, and other groups can come in and be hubs. It has a core structure. David Burgess from Boston College, a former president of SACNAS, and has been very involved in diversity efforts for a long time, is the lead PI and the director of the administrative core. There is a mentorship and networking core. The mentor training core is sitting at University of Wisconsin-Madison, which I have the privilege to direct, and PI, and then a professional development core. There is a fifth core pending. I know that some folks are involved in the RCMIs. Elizabeth O'Feely from Morehouse may be having a fifth core in that domain, and that is under negotiation. Here's some pictures of our leaders. And I just wanted to tell you that the training core, as I said, is going to have in-person training, synchronous training online, asynchronous training, and we really want to start to establish standards and related metrics for effective mentoring relationships across career stage, and with a particular focus on those working with underrepresented mentees. And when I say that is, I shared with you early some of the theory, at least the social cognitive career theory. There are lots of different theoretical lenses which are predicting persistence in science and medicine. And both on those theories as well as practice and other interventions, we're starting to pull together a list of what you might predict to be the standards for effective mentoring. And so you'll see some of them that I talked about already today, but for example, promoting mentee self-efficacy. The theoretical concepts would predict that if mentors are able to do that effectively, it will have an impact on persistence. So now becomes the work of metric development and interventions along all of these standards. And so we are in the work of also collecting metrics that are already set out to measure these across the relationship on both sides, as well as concrete competency and learning objectives for each of them, as well as collecting materials from across the country that have people working in these domains already and developing what's not developed. And so where we're focusing first, as I said, the culture responsive mentoring, the mentee self-efficacy, and work-life integration. We have some beta materials. I bring them up particular because if any of the campuses here are interested in beta testing any of those intervention modules, we would love to have you as partners, and we can talk more about that. But we are looking for institutions and groups and training programs across the country who want to try out things and give us some feedback so we can start to see what's useful to people. And so this is just a model to show that that's really what we're inviting partnership in for adapting existing interventions, beta testing interventions, being on development teams. There are some resources, not enormous ones, but if that becomes a limiting factor, we can talk about that. And there's folks all over the country participating, and you're welcome to participate as well if it's of interest to you. There is a NormanNet website. It is up, but only the home page is up. The real site won't go live till March, but this is a placeholder. You can sign up if you're interested as a mentor or a mentee. That puts you in the queue for information and as well as serving the MentorNet community very early on, but I wanted to let you know. And again, just to reiterate that you have a local partner in this arena, and so it's just good that you know about it. And I'm going to stop there. Way too many people to present. Obviously, I presented a lot of work from a lot of people, but I definitely want to give credit and also to the tremendous amount of funding from lots of different folks and entities to support this work as well. And to thank you for your attention.
Wow. We spoke of this retreat and this plenary session as the beginning. I'm just coming to grips with the extent of the voyage